Welcome to our Black Gay Diaspora podcast. I'm your host, Eric. For this episode, I'm joined by American poet, author, activist, and conceptual artist, Brad Walrond. On the 13th of October 2024, Brad's first collection of poetry titled Everywhere Alien came out, published by More Black Press in affiliation with Amistad HarperCollins. Before this, Brad's poems have been published in the Atlantic, Academy of American Poets, African Voices magazine, About Place Journal, and other publications. He's collaborated with artists like Erykah Badu, Camille A. Brown, and dancers, among others. His first recording is the single Underneath the Metal on the 1997 spoken word compilation album Eargasms, Crucial Poets Volume 1. Creatively and professionally, Brad came of age in New York City as part of the New York Black Arts Movement, Black Rock Coalition, the House Ballroom scene, the HIV Black queer activist community, and the underground house music scene. I enjoyed our introductory call from a couple of months ago, and I look forward to learning more about who Brad is and how he uses his intellect, talents, and experiences to enlighten and shine as a Black queer citizen. Hey, Brad, and welcome. How are you?
I am well. How are you? Thank you.
I love your shirt. I love the embroidery on the collar.
Thank you.
Are you back in New York? I know you've been doing a lot of touring for the book.
Yes, I am back in New York. It's been a welcome rest. I'm not going to say rest, but a lull, a nice lull. We started our book tour in Harlem, and then I was in Detroit for 3 days. Came back for a week or so, and then we were at the La Maison James Baldwin Centennial Festival in Paris. And I also had a book signing performance in Amsterdam with Dark Matter Collective. Then came back to the States and went to Furious Flower. And for those who don't know what Furious Flower is, Furious Flower happens every 10 years. It's a Black poetry dynastic mecca. So it was amazing to be in fellowship with such immense beings, Black poets, to share space and to share my work there as well. Furious Flowers at James Madison University, and there's a Eastern Mennonite University close by, so we had an engagement there. I just did something at Revolution Books back in the city here.
So you've been busy. All good stuff.
It's so rewarding and so exciting.
So how has it been emotionally for you with this being your first collection of poems, not your first time writing as a poet, but your first collection of poems? How has that been for you?
I mean, it's been certainly a long journey, but very well worth it. I also have gathered that I am a little spoiled, I think, this being my first collection. So when I got to Furious Flower, I got there a pinch late to the gala, and I sat down to someone who I didn't know. She's a poet and doing her PhD. I introduced myself and, just said my first collection. I have a poem published in the Atlantic. I settled into the space. I just felt like, you know what? Yes, I really belong here. To be part of that space where you are just witness to such epic Black genius. It also, in its own way, takes the pressure off. Like, you realize that this is an ocean. I can do my little splashes. It's okay. But to have my first collection out on a major press, it's just an affirmation that I've truly been blessed in this process.
Oh, well, congratulations. I forgot to say a thank you to Allison at HarperCollins for connecting us. You mentioned that this happens every 10 years, the Furious Flower in Harrisburg, Virginia, and your first major project is in that. That's amazing.
6 years ago, there was a Black Poetry Conference at Princeton. So that's where I met Erykah Brown and others. I mean, once again, that space is a similar kind of space, but I didn't have any work out or anything like that. So like 6 years later, to be at Furious Flower and among similar folks Yeah, I've been doing something. So, all these things kind of just hit you in different points. Yeah.
And you bring up Jericho Brown, who you mentioned also when you were at Revolutionary in Harlem. How are you connected with him? Another poet.
Jericho blurbed my book. This was months before he got the Pulitzer. So it was additionally exciting to, have someone of that caliber to blurb your book. All these different affirmations along the way that you collect. At Furious Flower, he created a form called the duplex. There is a duplex in Everywhere Alien. And the first night when everyone went back to the hotel, people were fellowshipping in the main hotel each night. And he sat down, he's reading the duplex from my book. So it's like all these little moments that are just extraordinarily special. Then, this is before Furious Flower in Paris. I think there's two main English bookstores in Paris. Mm-hmm. And this one is, I think it's Red Wheelbarrow Bookstore. Could be a little bit wrong with all of those, but that would be enough to Google and find it. I had the panel and the bookseller invited us to the store at some point, so we went the next day. And so we arrive, Everywhere Alien is in the main case, literally in a sea of James Baldwin classics. So like to walk upon that in Paris is like, and then in the store, it's next to Jericho's book as well. So yeah, it's been exciting.
Congratulations. And now, were you there for the centennial? Were you asked to come there because of your book being published?
Everywhere Alien is published with a partnership between More Black Press, so that's Jessica Kier Moore's press, and HarperCollins and Amistad. Jessica was invited to moderate a panel, and she invited me. I wouldn't say I was invited just because of my book.
I mean, of course, the body of work itself, but one of the things that I really like is your dedication. You dedicated to your mother and a couple other people, but I like the way you ended it. You said, and for every being who will have need of a dream to save them. Dreams belong to the future. Find yourself there no matter what. I love that.
Thank you. This work certainly saved me. With every life, you collect thrills, you collect disappointments. But for me to find my way back to my craft, to the venue where my whole being is activated, to throw myself back in that arena, to be still finding my audience, to have work be meaningful, to have different communities mirror that back to you, that has been extraordinary for me. We cannot give up on our dreams, our passions. We need to find every way to give ourselves to them. I'm very grateful that I chose. Yeah.
What were you doing before you decided to get back into writing poetry?
So, in the 90s, early 2000s is when I was very active, had a certain kind of prominence among our scene. That time was definitely about truly discovering my voice, to have the privilege of discovering it in the midst of the New Black Arts movement, where your peers are Saul Williams, Mos Def, Yasin Bey, Jessica Kier Moore, et cetera, et cetera. It's a force by itself, because as you grow in your own work or your own path, regardless of how it goes, at least for me, your voice is what you come back to. Knowing and understanding, I would say, the scale of it helps you move through a lot of different rooms where you may not be known. You may not be regarded. People may not necessarily feel the work the way you wanted them to. You know, as an artist, as a creative, you are always developing, you're always growing. And what that means that, you know, everything you do is not stellar. It's about collecting lessons along the way that help inform where your work is going and how to amplify those things. To have your work and voice nurtured in that context is something that allows you to move through all of the no's, all of the rejections or less than seemingly optimal encounters as you share your work. So I was a poet in that context. And then I happened into a career in HIV/AIDS prevention. I was walking in the village one day and ran into a friend, and they were at an organization called Minority Task Force on AIDS. And they were an assistant coordinator. And they said, "Oh, there's a job for a health educator. Are you looking for work?" And I was like, "No." And then he told me the salary is like, "Okay, I'll interview." You know, so I went and did that and started as a health educator. And then within a year and a half, I was director of the education department. That kind of took over for a while. And then I kind of got disillusioned to some degree. And then I went back to school, finished my bachelor's, ended up in a PhD program. And then I got very depressed, took a medical leave, and then I went to cooking school. And then I was cooking in New York City for 5 years. And that's when I stopped after that and came back to my work. And that's what I mean by it saved me, because I think for me, I reached the point where it felt like this was it. Either I do this or I don't have it, in a sense, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I would say cooking for me was like, I am used to in my life to like, okay, once I figure out I want to do something, I go all in, and I tend to rise, you know, somewhere. And, you know, I worked at several Michelin star kitchens, and career there was not flourishing, but I see it ultimately as my true work calling me. And finally I answered.
Okay. So when you answered, did you right away start this project, or was there other things that happened in between?
A very, very dear friend, and he's part of my dedication to the book, Craig Davis, he died suddenly. This was in 2013. He is one of my seminal influences as a young creative. There were two people, Saul Williams, to witness the way they possess a room with words and sound. These were kind of like my markers, like, okay, I'm not going to rest till I possess a room like that. Zook was one of those people. He was a consummate artist, a musician, an MC, actor, and he had a heart attack on a friend's couch. He died suddenly, and I call that time, that little season, the portal, because it felt like it just knocked me off of my show. All life's dimensions were collapsed into this space and time for me, and I knew that I would be writing and creating again. I just knew it. But then I just went back to my life cooking. I would say 6 or 7 months later, I still hadn't written anything. I realized that my depression had come back, went to my doctor, got my medicine. And once that lifted, I was writing like nonstop for 2 years. In the space of 2 years, I manuscripted 3 books. Out of that, The Seed of Everywhere Alien was in that space. That's how the work came about.
Thank you for your candor in that. I have a vision of bowling. It's connected, I promise. You know, when you have those things on, when those of us who can't bowl that well need to keep the ball from going into the gutter, it seems like the universe was finding ways to say, nope, this is your path. And when you were ready, you answered the call. It's amazing. So what is the meaning behind the title of the book?
In a concrete sense, where Alien is about my life portal, which is that time as a creative in the 90s, being part of 5 overlapping underground movements in New York City, which also was an extension of my HIV/AIDS work. It's the New Black Arts Movement, which was centered in Brooklyn. That represents, Erykah, Badu, Mos Def, Saul Williams, etc. The Black Rock Coalition. I first started writing in church. I was youth pastor at a church in East New York, and the minister of music was the musical director for Harry Belafonte. He and I would talk for hours about art, ministry, et cetera, et cetera. And then the pastor had an idea for a big arts production that the church would do, and for Harry Belafonte to keynote it. So by the time that came on board, the minister of music is looking at me, it's like, all this stuff you've been talking, like, I don't know what you're going to do, but you're going to do something. So that's when I wrote my first piece and performed it at that event. And so shortly thereafter, I'm at a barbershop in Brooklyn. I see a flyer for the Sunday Tea Party. It said poetry, open mic, music, or whatever. So I called, I came down. So that was at Frank's Lounge every Sunday, and then a house party afterward. So that became my creative home. The house music portion where I'm partying with people from the garage, people from the Black Rock Coalition. Ian Friday, who is the person who started the Sunday Tea Party, his girlfriend at the time and the person who ran the door was Vernon Reed's first wife. You're like privy to, party to, part of an inheritance of culture in all these different kinds of spaces. So that was my entree to house music, to the Black Rock Coalition and all of that. Okay. And then when I went into HIV and AIDS is actually when I discovered Essex Henfield, other countries. So even though I'm in a pure poetry space, it wasn't until I actually went into HIV and AIDS that I become privy to this other part of the legacy of Black poetry. And then also by my virtue of my work in HIV and AIDS is my access to the house ballroom scene. So it's being privy and part of all these different spaces and movements that are overlapping and having an experience where different parts of you is under-honored or not necessarily privileged in the different spaces. And that's what Everywhere Alien represents.
Okay. So many nuggets there. And you said something just now, the diversity of your interests. Was it Vernon Reed? Was he behind the band Living Color? All these different genres, Harry Belafonte, or even you saying you were a youth pastor and then just going back to what you were saying earlier, being in Paris and, having your work next to James Baldwin, who was also very involved in the church when he was young. To me, what I hear is, again, the universe is like, no, this is where you're supposed to go.
That's where my voice ultimately centers. I think that's why for me, the first part of my journey felt a little disjointed. Some folks come to this and they know they're entertainers, they want to be famous or known. Some people just are clear what their mantle is. And I think for me, ministry has always been that for what my voice speaks toward. I think in my own way, I had to find my way back to it.
Okay. You mentioned that you finished your bachelor's, it sounds like when you were into your adulthood. What were some of your interests? Like, did you always know that you were a poet or a writer?
I think that formative time with the Sunday Tea Party and becoming a poet, that kind of anchored my own sense of myself as a writer. I would feel like I missed out if I didn't fully manifest that. But my undergrad and my PhD work is in political science. So I was always interested in global politics. And my HIV/AIDS work really became a career. I don't think that became something until it happened. It's not like I had a premonition that I would be doing that kind of work.
Just based on my limited awareness of these underground worlds, to go from those worlds to what you were doing with HIV/AIDS, transitioning to that world.
Certainly, these are different worlds. I don't know if I have an option of not showing up as my full self. That has all of its own troubles. In my work as health educator and then assistant coordinator, there was an RFP that called for group interventions for high-risk HIV-negative men in the country. And I think there were 5 or so organizations that had been awarded, and 2 or 3 years in, no groups had started at any of the organizations. So I started and had the sensibility to call upon my network. Within a month and a half, I had both groups started, one in Harlem and one in Manhattan. One in Harlem, and one in Brooklyn. I would say that this notion of connection, this notion of ministry is what I carry forward in making those groups happen. That also represented a really important moment for me, because part of what I did take note of, particularly in that work, is for so many of the men that were part of that group, it was the first time that they were in a venue, their Blackness, their manhood, and their sexuality share the same space. It was so impactful for them. And there is a way in which we often speak about the HIV/AIDS space almost as an implicit deficit. This work has been perhaps the most enlightening of my life, I would say. Even as it ties into poetry, so the voice of Essex Henfield to me is a voice of such magnanimous courage. We don't know what Essex's voice would have been without the context of him living with HIV and AIDS, up against the prospect of his mortality, and not only that, but of his community. It's certainly inside that space where we see him make such beauty out of the spiritual, the erotic, the profane. That represents a North Star for me in my own work, the kind of courage that I hope to bring to it. And working in these spaces where sex is being able to talk about it, to talk about sexuality, to talk about desire. It's not even a luxury. It is how we save ourselves. To be swarmed with beings who are facing their own real mortality. You discover God in those spaces. And I think that's one of the most amazing things that I have taken with me. You know, the Bible says the least of these. It's like in this space with the public health context and these Black men who, because of this context, we're having conversations that we would not ordinarily have, or that the world generally didn't give us the space to have. And then to really see in real time, like, how powerful that is, just to sit there and to feel. It's life-changing. Yeah.
Thank you for that. What I know of you at this point is you're more than an artist. You're an experience. But where does that come from, just showing up just as yourself?
So much comes back to the church and ministry for me. Like I remember probably around 12 or so, just having a personal spiritual experience, and how much that meant to me, and just nurturing that space of vulnerability and spirituality. That was just a fundamental part of who I was. And then you're feeling that call to the ministry, and we all have callings. Whatever our callings are, they are the most important things. I think that's what roots me in that, honoring the truth inside you, regardless of the external context, in a way that is something that I've always been doing. As I came to these different spaces, that's what I was connecting to.
You're also a native New Yorker, but you're the third guest that has roots or lineage in Barbados. How that you're aware of, does that influence who you are and how you move about in the world?
I will have to say that that part of the journey is still unfolding itself. When I was at Furrier's Flower, I connected with a fellow poet. She was sitting with her partner, so I kept running into her, and they had a little white dog that they were holding throughout the whole thing, So at some point, they're sitting down there. We just start talking, and then I just said, I'm so struck by this little dog. Like, here we are at a Black poetry conference, and I have this little white dog. But anyway, she ended up being Bayesian as well. We kind of talked about that. But I said to her at some point, we're at a lunch, I realized like how high this gift is for me. Implicitly, I understand that it's from somewhere else. It's bigger than me. I believe that has something to do with my ancestry, but I can't name those things yet in this dispensation to begin to discover those things. So I can't speak specifically with respect to Barbados. I can speak specifically to the nature of this gift, the realization that what comes through you comes through from different levels. For me, that is one of the elements that ultimately truly grounds me. It compels a commitment to be a vessel, to honor what you've been given. The extraordinariness does not belong to me.
I think of bodies of water. How I'm feeling what you're sharing is creativity and faith are together. They feed off of each other. I never thought, even with the church or religion, there's creativity in that because of your own personal experiences with faith and the ministry. Yeah, I just see bodies of water when you share that. The cover of the book, wow, what is behind that? Because I love it. It's arresting.
I had started with another artist, and when we got those first mocks, my team was not happy. So kind of had to launch back on a new search. Part of what drove that new search was an effort to match the music that's in the book to give it some kind of voice on the cover, in a sense. So I went scouring the internet for something, and I came upon this image. And the artist, John Bates, maybe 10 years ago, I had bought a piece from him, so I know who he was. We finally reached out to him. In the process, he would only respond to me. And I think I found the image, but I couldn't find who the photographer was. So then I reached out to a friend of mine, Dwayne Rogers. He's a very incredible photographer. And he's like, oh, that's Sarah Weisfer. I was like, do you know her? He's like, no, but I know her work. So then we had to go searching her. And so Sarah Weisfer, Ugandan-born, Kenyan-based photographer. She did a photo story on albinos in West Africa and the way they are treated. This image is a photograph of an albino boy with a bird, a white bird, I encourage anyone who sees this to please look up Sarah Weiswa, Waiswa. It's her last name. A genius. She's a scholar, a writer, a photographer. She's astonishing. There's stranger in it in the story title. I forget, something stranger, but you see the original image. It's crazy. So we finally got her to license. It was a extended journey to get to it. What is more everywhere alien than albinos in West Africa? The question of identity, Blackness, all of its intersections. But there's so much music in the book. And of course, it is rooted to the Black Rock Coalition, to the underground house and dance music community, to all the ways in which those spaces like literally herald all of music, and the way in which knowledge and ways of knowing is transferred in those spaces with music and movement. That's part of the excavation work of the book. And as much as I lived in these spaces, I'm still learning what I learned from them.
I think the better word is tenacity. When you were sharing about just the journey of tracking down everything that was needed for the cover, it's like, well, it explains why you have been successful in several different careers. And then you mentioned music. I found that Alien Day, which was also released this year, 2024, from what I understand, is the companion to Everywhere Alien. But can you explain that? It's a spoken word album.
Yes. I released Everywhere Alien June of this year. 9 pieces in there. Only one of them is something that is not in the book. To me, it's a continuation of where this journey began. Like in the new Black arts movement, where you're discovering your voice, and yes, you're a poet and there's the page, and that's important. Still, what we're inheriting is bigger than a page. It is sound, it is music, it is, the legacy of the Black arts movement with Amiri Baraka and Ntozake Shange. And so the way this gift lives in my body, it is a full body thing. The work on Alien Day is manifestation of its fuller forms, in a sense. My first recording was Underneath the Meadow, which was the breakout spoken word album that was 90s. And then I come back to my work, and the first thing I record is on my very dear friend Shelly Nicole's album, which was being produced by Vernon Reid. Shelly Nicole, if you don't know who she is, Blackbush, her band Blackbush, epic artist of all kinds, voice, musician, actor. She's amazing. And Vernon Reid was producing her album. So my very first thing that I record is a song, and Vernon Reid is playing guitar on it. This work, it lives in my body as the engagement of music and sound. And Alien Day is an expression of that.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I did find the song that you spoke on her album. What intrigued me was the title, but having a man's voice on it. Was it Fallopa or Fallopia?
Fallopia.
Yeah. Being reminded of other people like Vernon Reid. It's like, we don't just live in the world of R&B and hip hop. As I've learned as I get older, Black influence on anything that's popular has always been around.
It's not so much that I am part of these things because I was so conscious and so advanced and so aware of Black culture while I was a part of it. It's one accepting that I've certainly been blessed to encounter these spaces, open enough to let them move me, but the understanding of the extent to which these spaces are truly radical, revolutionary, is something that I'm always learning. That has been part of the work of Everywhere Alien, allowing this context to teach you more.
Now you're back in New York. Does that mean the tour is over? Or, I think you said in the beginning, a resting period, and then you'll be back out promoting it.
I'm always promoting it. In my own head, I'll be touring Everywhere Alien for at least a year. So we have some reviews that are lining up. Other countries who I mentioned or chronicle in the book, which is one of the first Black gay writing groups in the country that was rooted in the HIV/AIDS pandemic. They're starting a virtual series. So in January or February, I'll be doing something with them. We had the big, gigantic splash August and September. A lot of great things.
So if I'm understanding correctly, is that your full-time career? Is that you're a poet and an author at this point?
Not quite yet. We are getting there. Apart from my real life, which is this, I am a program evaluation capacity building program manager at an organization called FIPS Neighborhoods. It's two things. It's a for-profit affordable housing entity. I think it began in the late 1800s, centered in the Bronx, but they have buildings throughout the city. And then they started a not-for-profit arm, which deals with education and after-school programming and arts and supportive housing and all that. In that space, I am doing user-focused evaluation with the different program models and engaging the program models to create a process that allows them to formulate models of their work and a mechanism to evaluate it from the ground up. I'm grateful because it's allowing me to do what I've been doing.
Are you able to share if you're working on any other literary projects?
I have begun my next manuscript. I don't have a name for it yet, but I anticipate it'll be done by March. I am also part of kind of like collective traveling performance called Ballroom Has Something to Say. It is a melange of singers, voguers, poets. Just a performance that takes up those forms.
Okay.
I just part of a film project that is focused on O'Shea Sibley's life. O'Shea Sibley is a Black gay man. Last year was killed at a gas station, and his friends were in Brooklyn, went to a gas station, and they were listening to Beyonce and voguing, and some group of boys at the gas station ended up murdering him. So that project is honoring his life.
You're one of the writers on that?
Yes.
Okay. I know you are connected to music through spoken word and through your poetry. Has any of your work, or do you use any of your writings as song lyrics, either for yourself or for other artists?
I haven't written songs for other people.
I always end with asking if you have any final thoughts or insights.
I would just say how important it is to commit to being yourself, to commit to becoming yourself. With that, there always is the implicit element of risk. Because if you are becoming yourself, that implicitly means there's portions of you that you do not know yet. Please push past those spaces to discover what that is. That is our offering to the world, and Everywhere Alien is a part of my offering to the world. I know that I am here and certainly a better human being because I endeavored. There cannot be a downside to that.
I feel your ministry in that, so thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And where can we engage with you or follow you online?
My website, bradwalrond.com, Instagram, everything is Brad Walrond.
Thank you for spending time with us. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, comment, and subscribe. Share with your friends too. You can also follow us on Instagram at Our Black Gay Diaspora and on Twitter at BLK Gay Diaspora. Until next time.